output side, if you try to, if from the output side, so total output is either in the form of again consumption goods plus saving. If output is not in the form of consumption goods, then it is in the form of savings. There is another way to understand it. If you are talking about households, so households will spend their income on the consumption goods, and if they are not spending their income on consumption goods, they will save. So when we say savings for the economy means it is savings in the form of capital goods, right? So the money left over after consumption, or the portion of income which is not consumed by the households, which is left, either it is kept in the bank or either it is invested in some financial instrument. So from the household side, we call it savings. From the firm side, we will call it investment, but from the household side, we will call it savings. And that is why I keep on telling you that savings is that part of income which is not consumed by the household. Now, this savings directly goes to the other side of the economy, that is in form of investment. So no saving is left unutilized, or all the savings which takes place in the economy automatically gets invested in the economy. So the savings, which is the leakage, is just equal to investment, which is the injections. That's how savings and investment is equal to each other. Savings and investment is the reflection of same thing, or you can say two sides of the same coin for the economy, or two ways to express the output of capital goods in the economy. And therefore, this system, the system of circular flow of income, remains intact. Nothing is going out from this system. Okay, savings from one side goes to other side in form of investment. Are you able to understand this now, everyone?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else which you want to understand from the classical system?
मैम वन क्वेश्चन एक है मैम, जब क्लासिकल इकोनॉमी में 2 सेक्टर होता है, तो जब इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड होता है वहाँ पर 4 सेक्टर की आवश्यकता होती है, तो वहाँ पर कैसे ये ट्रेड होगा?
See, I told you when we were talking about circular flow of income, what we have discussed. आप अपनी पिछली क्लास बहुत जल्दी भूल जाते हैं. There are 3 ways in which we can analyze the economy: 2-sector economy, 3-sector economy, basic principle remains the same, nothing else changes. Or we are talking about 4-sector economy, which is the open economy. Now, in case of 2-sector economy, y is equal to c plus s, which is always equal to y is equal to c plus I. And therefore, s is equal to I, always. Okay. If you are talking about three-sector economy, Y is equal to C plus S plus T, which is equal to Y is equal to C plus I plus G, and therefore you say S plus T is equal to I plus G. So S plus T becomes the leakages and I plus G is the injections, and they are equal to each other. If you are talking about fourth sector economy, you are writing it as Y is equal to C plus S plus T plus M, that is imports, which will be equal to Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X. Therefore, for equilibrium, what you are saying is S plus T plus M should be equal to I plus G plus X. Okay. So it doesn't matter that whether we are talking about open economy or closed economy, our basic relationship is this. The basic relationship or the basic assumption for the equilibrium of the economy is that savings should always be equal to investment. So all the variables on the left side has to be equal to the variables on the left side. So all the leakages should be equal to the injections. So that's how it is reflected in the three-sector economy and in the four-sector economy. See, I explained to you monetary variables and real variables separately. So please see that slide again or see those videos again where I'm trying to explain the monetary variables and your real variables. Real variables means we are talking about labor demand, labor supply, total output, and real interest rate, savings and investment. But monetary variables are just the aggregate demand and price level. So classical system, on the basis of MV is equal to PT theory, it believes that demand is always a monetary variable, or demand is more related to money. Demand is not related to real variables. Okay, so in that way, there is a separation between monetary variables and real variables. And maybe these things will become more clear when we are talking about the Keynes idea, because Keynes starts from the classical system itself. So if you do not have any particular question, we move to the Keynesian system.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now we are talking about Keynesian system. Up to now, we have discussed the classical theory of output, employment, and income determination. Now we are talking about Keynesian theory of output, employment, and income determination. So for doing this, let us first understand that what is the difference between the classical system and the Keynesian system? Why Keynes is stating its theory in a different way. And when we say Keynesian theory, so Keynesian theory is basically what was explained in the book, that is General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money. Okay, so 1936 General Theory is the main text, or is the main literature which is related to the origin of the Keynesian system. So when you say Keynesian system, we are talking about John Maynard Keynes. Okay. Now the first thing which Keynes starts with is short run. Now every time try to have a comparison between Keynes and what we have studied in classical. We talked about long run in the classical system. In the classical system, every equilibrium is related to long run. In the Keynesian system, every equilibrium is related to short run. So this is the first important change which is coming in the equilibrium, in the macroeconomic equilibrium. Every equilibrium is related to only short run, not long run, because Keynes says that long run is something which is not visible clearly. Human beings cannot see long run with perfect foresight. Perfect foresight means we are not aware about all the possible changes in the long run, and therefore we cannot predict or we cannot take decisions for the long run. So what we can predict or what we can understand with the given information is the short run. So our decisions are also related to short run. What is going to happen after 25 years, we don't know. But maybe we can understand or we can predict that what is going to happen within the 6 months now. So Keynes says that short run is the reality and long run is only an ideal situation. The second important thing which the Keynes starts with is less than full employment. Now, Keynes is saying that full employment is not possible, because full employment is possible only in the long run. So in the short run, because full employment is not possible, so it will always be a less than full employment situation. Whenever the economy is in equilibrium, the equilibrium is not full employment equilibrium, but it is less than full employment equilibrium. So now with this, one important change which will come into the system is the aggregate supply curve is not vertical, but it is horizontal. So here you take price, here you take Y, and that's how the supply curve, aggregate supply curve of the economy for the Keynesian system. You remember, for the classical system, the aggregate supply curve was this, vertical. Okay? But in the Keynesian system, what you find is that the supply curve is looking horizontal, or it becomes horizontal. That means at a given price level, this price level, you can increase the supply as much as you want. So that means that economy has unutilized capacity, unutilized production capacity, in the short run. So the statement of all the production capacity is fully utilized is not applicable in case of the Keynesian system, because we are talking about short run, and in the short run there will always be unutilized production capacity. So with unutilized production capacity, there is always a possibility to increase the aggregate supply. Are you getting this?
Yes, ma'am.
Everyone present in the class, are you able to understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. So now, because Keynes is talking about short run, less than full employment, then it is followed by uh, aggregate supply curve becoming horizontal. Why? Because money has a production capacity, unutilized production capacity. So Keynes says that in the short run, prices are rigid in the downward direction. Now, this is again another important assumption of the classical system or theory of the classical system, where prices are rigid. Why prices are rigid? Because we are talking about short run, full employment does not exist, so price do not change. And this rigidity of prices is mostly in the downward direction. What we are saying is that if you see in the above diagram, P bar, why we are writing P bar? When we put a bar on a particular variable, we understand that we are talking about a fixed level, a given level. So price does not move in the downward direction. At any point of time, rational individuals or rational firms or rational sellers and buyers will not accept a reduction in price, but increase in price is possible every time. But downward direction in downward movement of price is not possible. Any price. Now these prices can be related to P, it can be related to W, it can be related to R, any price. General price level, wages or interest rate, all are rigid in the downward direction, because in the short run, economic agents will not accept a lower price than the current price. They can accept a higher price, but lower price is not generally accepted. Okay. So classical system has price flexibility, but the Keynesian system has price rigidity. And the rigidity is more in terms of downward direction. Price does not go down from its previous level, but it can always go up. So this was the assumption related to the prices. Price rigidity is one of the most important factor of the Keynesian system. Now, because prices are rigid in the downward direction, now Keynes comes to the next point. Keynes says aggregate demand and effective demand is the most important variable to increase the level of income and decrease the level of unemployment. So another important concept which was developed by Keynes was effective demand, theory of effective demand. He says not only demand, but it is the effective demand which determines the equilibrium level for the economy. So effective demand, the point of demand or the point on the demand curve where economic agents are actually spending, that becomes effective demand. Like we have always tried to distinguish between demand, wish and need. So we say that any wish or any demand, any wish or any need becomes demand when it is joined with a price and a time and a willingness to pay. So similarly, at the macro level, effective demand is that situation where people are willing to spend what is required. So that is effective demand. Okay. So aggregate demand and effective demand in the Keynesian system becomes the most important factor. Now you go to the previous diagram where we were talking about aggregate supply curve becoming horizontal. Now see, if you increase the level of demand, AD1, AD2, AD3, what is happening every time? Income is increasing from Y1 to Y2 to Y3. Now think about the Keynesian system here. This was the Keynesian aggregate supply curve. Okay. Now here, if you increase the level of demand, see what is happening. Aggregate demand, AD dash, AD double dash, AD triple dash. Income remains the same because it is the full employment level. So income is not changing. What is changing is price from P dash to P double dash to P triple dash. So aggregate demand plays an important role in increasing the level of income according to Keynes. Why? Because prices are rigid and aggregate supply curve is perfectly elastic. In case of the chemical system, aggregate supply curve is perfectly inelastic. That is why supply does not change even if the demand changes. So only price will change. Is it okay? Are you able to understand? Any doubt?
मैम
Any clarification?
प्राइसेस है ये डाउन, ये एक बार फिर से बता दीजिए
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, how should demand be generated?
Up to now, what is the equation which you have used to explain demand? Can you tell me? How we are writing aggregate demand? Tell me. Up to now, how we are writing aggregate demand? Aggregate demand we are writing as C plus I if we are talking about the two sector economy. So Keynes is saying that in order to generate aggregate demand, what has to be done is increase the C and I, that is consumption and investment. So we'll come to this later. But up to now, understand this, that every time there is an increase in consumption or investment in the economy, aggregate demand goes up and therefore income level goes up. Okay. Now there is another important assumption with the Keynesian system, or another important aspect of the Keynesian system. Please pay attention to this. Government expenditure plays an important role in increasing the level of aggregate demand during recession or depression. Therefore, government intervention is important. So now, Keynes adds another variable to the aggregate demand, that is C plus IG. So now there is an addition to the C plus I in form of G. G is an injection. G is related to government expenditure. And government expenditure is important in order to increase the level of aggregate demand. And particularly when Keynes is talking about government expenditure, you remember we talked about, we are talking about the Keynesian theory, which is related to the 1936 general theory. Okay. At 1936, when this book is published, it is in the context of Great Depression, which was 1929. Right, so during the 1920s, most of the European economies experienced depression. Some economies experienced recession. Some economies experienced depression. What do you mean by recession or depression? When the economic activity slows down, or when the economic activity is moving downward direction. Recession or depression. Okay. So if downward movement in economic activities continues for more than 1 year, for more than 5 years, then it is depression. But if the economic activities are moving in the downward direction or they are contracting, economic activities are contracting, so there is contraction in economic activities for a few quarters, continuously, then we are talking about a recession or slowdown. As you talk about Indian economy these days, there's a slowdown in the Indian economy. So when we talk about few quarters, then we are talking about recession or slowdown. When we are talking about prolonged recession or prolonged slowdown, we call it depression. Okay. And if all the economic variables are moving and others are moving, says say demand is decreasing, but prices are not necessarily decreasing everywhere. Demand for maybe demand for fuel is decreasing, or demand for transport is decreasing, but demand for medicine, demand for consumption goods is rising. So this does not mean depression. Why? Because there are few variables which are increasing, there are few variables which are decreasing. Recession, depression, we are going to discuss again when we are talking about business cycles. So we are restricting ourselves, but what is more important for us to understand here is that government expenditure plays an important role in increasing the level of aggregate demand. And every time when we are talking about this point, this diagram should come into picture. Aggregate demand moving from AD1 to AD2. Now this AD always has C plus I plus G. So as you increase the government expenditure, you are obviously seeing that income increases from Y1 to Y2 to Y3. And therefore, government intervention is important. So in the classical system, it was laissez-faire, but in the Keynesian system, government is an integral part of the economy. Now, initially, when Keynes is talking about these theories, the economy is still a closed economy. Economy is not an open economy, or Keynes is not talking about an open economy initially. So we are also talking about a closed economy where aggregate demand is equal to C plus I plus G. And one more important addition to this government expenditure is autonomous. And exogenous. That means it is independent from the level of income. Whether the level of income is low or high, it will not affect the level of government expenditure, because government expenditure will take place autonomously. It is the government which will decide how much of government expenditure. It is not the income level of the economy which will decide the government expenditure. So that is why it is autonomous and exogenous. Now there is one important thing about the Keynesian system. Keynes talks about classical dichotomy. Classical dichotomy does not always exist. Now
Madam,
this
what is
class,
exogenous?
what you are asking?
What is exogenous?
Okay, let me explain like this. Suppose you are saying that demand, quantity demanded is a function of price. Okay, but you know that quantity demanded can also depend on the level of income, can depend on the level of population, technology, price of Y commodity, or preferences, lot many things. But what you do is, when you are talking about demand function, you are assuming all other factors to be constant or all other variables to be given. That means that demand, any change in demand will not bring a change in all these fixed factors. Change in demand can bring a change in price. Change in price can bring a change in demand. But these two variables, when they will change, they will not affect the level of income or the price of Y or the preference of the population. And that's how what you say is that all these variables become exogenous. That means outside the system. They are determined outside the system. Outside the system means they are outside the bracket. Like you have talked about your production function. Q is a function of L, K, but T is outside and it has a bar. So technology is exogenous. Technology is given. Technology, if any change takes place in the technology factor, that is autonomous from the output or the inputs. That is exogenous. Now, if you put Q is a function of L, K, T, all. So now technology is endogenous. So there are two words here, endogenous, exogenous. So variables can be exogenous, variables can be endogenous. That means the independent variable is not affected by the dependent variable. Do you understand this? This labor and capital are the two independent variables, and Q, that is total output, depends on these two variables. So Q is the dependent variable, L and K are the independent variable. But these independent variables are exogenous. They are changing within the model. But T is exogenous because T is changing from outside. But when T can also change with the change in level of output, then T will become endogenous. Or you can say that change in T is independent from the change in output when it is exogenous. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So, do you have any question?
Ma'am,
Yes.
ma'am, what is meaning of dichotomy?
Now, this is something which we will we will start the next class when we are trying to understand the Keynesian theory of employment. In the next class, I will talk about Keynesian theory of employment, but we'll start with classical dichotomy. But classical dichotomy is related to the fact that real variables do not affect monetary variables. So this is dichotomy, because in the classical system we are explaining that monetary variables are separate and real variables are separate, and there is no relationship between monetary variables and real variables. Keynes call it as a dichotomy. So it is a dichotomous situation. That means these two are separate. Monetary variables are independent from real variables. Real variables are independent from the monetary variables. That means real variables that is output or demand for labor, supply for labor, real wage rate, savings, investment, and monetary variables. Monetary variables means aggregate demand, prices, monetary wage, or interest rate. So they are separate from these real variables. So this is dichotomy according to Keynes. Why dichotomy? Or you can say this is a dualism, that there are two variables existing separately. They are acting individually. They cannot affect each other. So aggregate demand cannot affect output. Output cannot affect aggregate demand. That means what you are saying according to the classical system is supply does not affect demand and demand does not affect supply. So Keynes is criticizing this classical dichotomy. Keynes says that it is actually in the economy, monetary variables can affect real variables, and aggregate demand, most importantly, aggregate demand is not a monetary variable according to Keynes, but it is a real variable. Why? Because it is defined as C plus I plus G. So these are few points related to the Keynesian system. There are many more which we are going to discuss in the coming classes. So maybe now we can disconnect the class. If you have any particular question, let me see.
Ma'am?
Otherwise, yes.
Ma'am, prices are rigid in downward direction. How?
Yeah. See, in very general sense, you should understand that in any dynamic economy, generally prices do not move downwards from their previous level. Like suppose you talk about, take a very simple example, talk about ice cream. So in case of ice cream, if you try to compare the prices, ice cream prices say 20 years ago and ice cream prices now. So do you think that prices have come down? Although the production of ice cream has increased a lot, but the prices have not come down from the previous level. And in most of the cases, you talk about labor wages, they are continuously increasing. You talk about any of the price, other than say few items, very few items you will find then you will observe that the same product is now sold at a lower price. Generally, what happens that either the quantity will change, either the quality will change, either the technology will change. Anything which is sold cheaper today is of a lower technology or is of a lower specification. But if you are talking about continuous upgradation in the product, then definitely the prices will be moving in the upward direction. So Keynes says that generally, in the short run, there is a tendency of prices to become rigid in the downward direction. Try to pay attention to the words which I am using. In the short run, there is a general tendency in prices to become rigid in the downward direction. No one is willing to accept a lower price for the same product in a given time period. Okay, so everyone wants a higher price. So that was the idea behind rigidity of prices, but the reasons behind price rigidity is more important. And we are going to discuss in the coming class that why Keynes was successful in explaining the price rigidity, why price rigidity exists. Okay?
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.